afternoon. You are welcome. I'll just wait for her to get settled, and then we'll continue on. I just want to point out, thank you so much for showing up. This is how democracy works, is people show up in defense of themselves, their neighbors, and their neighborhoods, and we just take care of ourselves and our kin, and the world is better as a consequence. So thank you very much. You are the shower-uppers, and you're the ones that ultimately lead to resilient communities. So it's an honor to be working with you. Okay, next slide. Here we go. So just only 27 slides. I'll be really quick. I'll just talk about structures, the first 5 feet, defensible space, and then plants, and then a small conclusion. Next slide. So we've already shown this map at the West Basin Municipal Water District's booth, and this just shows the extra high fire hazard areas, the moderate, and then the fire hazard areas. Next slide, please. And this is really important. Even if you're not on the map, you actually might have a risk, because I want to point out that downtown Santa Rosa wasn't on the map during the Tubbs fire. Downtown Altadena wasn't on the map for that fire. So there's a lot of unknowns with the climate right now. We just can't predict exactly how excitable it will be. So we'll start with the basics. First place to start is your structure. We have found this out from time and time again, whether the Paradise, the Tunnel, or the Tubbs, that you are more likely to lose your house to a firebrand than direct flame contact. And so a burning ember from a plant or a tree or a house, that burning ember gets picked up by those Santa Ana or Diablo winds, shoved well ahead of the wall of flames. And about 65% of the homes lost in the Woolsey fire were lost to firebrands. 40% of those burnt from the inside out, which means that firebrand was able to penetrate the structure and ignite something inside of it. So always start with your heart, just like yourself. Start with your heart and then work outwards. And some of the key characteristics of our screening, I'll just work clockwise, our screening, make sure that you have at least 1/8 inch metal mesh protecting all openings. You have to think about firebrands as wasps. They will find the most vulnerable part of your structure and penetrate it. Class A roof, the only one allowable, but really the most vulnerable part of your structure is your eaves, because that's where that hot convective air gets caught up underneath, and all those firebrands get shoved up underneath any kind of overhang. So whether it's the eaves, your deck, or a patio that's overhanging a slope, those are really the vulnerable places. On the structure, it's the eaves. You want to make sure that you have double-paned windows, not only for fire protection, to stop the radiant heat from entering the house, and for energy conservation. It's now a state law because of Title 24, Cal Green, but also, as we found out in both the Eaton fire and the Palisades, the winds were moving debris so strongly that they were crashing through single pane windows. And so double pane windows actually provides this little bit more insurance. This was also common during the Witch Fire in San Diego in 2007, where debris was just flying through the windows of these ranch houses and igniting them. So double pane windows, non-flammable siding, and really non-flammable siding means non-flammable, but it just means when the firebrand hits, they drop. I've been working in fire country since the 1990s, and I've seen plenty of wood structures survive. Just as long as when the firebrand hits it, it drops, and there's nothing to ignite on the ground below it. Anything that just can absorb that heat, hit those firebrands, and allow to drop. And really, the vulnerabilities on your siding are when you're going to have two materials meet. Anytime two materials meet, they create a vulnerability that over time, just like us, structures begin to sag and open up, and it creates these vulnerabilities in between. So around the windows, the trim is a place of vulnerability. If you have a base layer and then a top layer, that strip in there becomes a vulnerability. Anytime you have two materials meeting, you have a possibility for vulnerables. You have great access around the structure, so emergency personnel can actively do their job and run around and put out those small spot fires as those firebrands ignite stuff. Non-flammable materials all up against the house, nothing less than a 1-hour fire-resistant rating. Your address is always visible at the street and on the structure. You are not likely to get an emergency response if the emergency responders cannot call in your address. And remember, these people are moving really fast. You want to make that address loud and proud. Nothing remotely flammable stored up against the house, like trash cans. Does anybody have trash cans stored up against your house? Yeah, during the Eaton fire, you know, those houses were so close together, people stored all their trash cans up against the side of their house, and in those 70-mile-an-hour winds, the lids were flying open, the firebrands coming in, igniting the contents. It was trash day on January 7th. All those bins were full, and then you were funneled with the trash cans sitting up underneath the eaves, unfortunately. So if you live in a small lot property and your trash cans are up against your house, just put a latch on the lid. Velcro or any kind of latch that would keep that lid down in high winds would really help. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then vents, you guys have talked to all the vent people here today. We have loads of vent. I think we have 5 people selling vents. They make a world of difference. But if you're living on ridge tops or any kind of top of the slope, the problem here is that for every 10% increase in slope, flame length doubles. So if you had a 3-foot flame on a flat ground and a 30% slope, you would be looking at a 30 or 40-foot flame. And so flames elongate on slope, so you really need way more protection on your structure if you're on the top of a slope or a ridge top. And you can see these people did it. Small eaves, low vulnerability, great management of where they're having the two materials meet, no gaps, no fissures, double paned windows, a siding that would allow the firebrands to hit, drop, nothing in the zone 0. This house is a good model of fire resistance. So, and then, next slide, please. I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of outbuildings in Rancho Palos Verdes, this peninsula. You guys just have more money than other people, and I've seen more tree houses in this community than I've seen anywhere in the state. Does anybody have a tree house here? Well, but there are a lot of other structures. This is a hay barn for Rolling Hills Estate. We have an ADU, an accessory unit behind the residence, and these buildings are just as vulnerable and should be treated like your own house. This is actually really good. The siding, a firebrand would hit and drop, but the vulnerability is the gap in the door. The firebrand would go right into the gap and then ignite the feed that's inside of it. So it's just these really small things here. This person was getting rated so well. I was giving them A+ on everything, and then I came to the back side of their accessory unit and saw that their rain gutters hadn't been cleaned in years, enough to grow weeds. Sometimes fire protection is just simple, basic housekeeping. It's sometimes not as complicated as you think. So make sure your weatherization is up. Make sure you're doing basic maintenance, filling the gaps, painting, and then definitely check these screens to make sure that those firebrands cannot penetrate the interior of the structure. Next slide, please. And then, is anybody on a small lot property? So small lot means that your neighbor is within 20 feet of your house. Oh, wow. So they say if you have a fire-hardened structure with just 10 feet of defensible space, you have about an 80% chance of survival, which is really good. But if you have a neighbor within 20 feet of you and their house in flames, the radiant heat coming off that structure would be enough to ignite yours. And this explains the largest calamities in the state's history. The tunnel fire of 1991, 2,900 structures lost. When one house went, they all went because of that radiant heat. It was just a domino effect right down. This is a great example. This is the old fire in San Bernardino, 2003. 1,003 structures were lost. There's no fire on either side of any of these houses. One house wasn't immune to the firebrands. They ignited because the structures were so close to each other. It just dominoed right down the street. I want to point out that that's blue gum eucalyptus, that the houses themselves were more flammable than the vegetation. We have a real habit in fire country to blame the vegetation for everything that's bad, when in fact a lot of it is how we laid out our communities, how we placed our homes on our properties, and then the proximity to these big fuel objects like our neighbors and sage structures. Next one. So really, if you live on a small lot, the first and foremost, most important thing is see if you can put a non-flammable fence in between your property. And a cinder block wall would be the best, because the cinder block wall will absorb some of that radiant heat and not push it onto your property. In South Orange County, these walls are mandatory on any kind of small lot property. We've known about the power of conductive heat. So definitely a non-flammable barrier with nothing planted on either side, just directly in between the houses. If you're on a small lot property, you also want to create multiple ways off your property. This is part of the cookie crusade, where you just bring a plate of cookies over to your neighbor and see if you can negotiate a gate in between the properties. And we saw this in the tunnel fire, the camp fire, and the Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa, where people got the evacuation order so late that when they went to go flee out their front door, they couldn't because the flames were already on them. And they were hemmed into their property, because what we do in California is we plant all our perimeter with incredibly huge hedges, and we lock ourselves in with the only way off is through the front door and to the street. So I'm encouraging anybody in high fire hazard areas that lives on a small lot to create multiple ways off your property. See if you can share vegetation. Californians don't like our neighbors, so we'll plant our hedges. We don't. But this is all part of that cookie crusade, because the better they do, the better you do. You save yourself, you could save your neighbor. So just see if you can share as much vegetation, share the responsibility of that vegetation as much as possible. He's going, no way. It's not gonna happen. Pools. Anybody with a pool? All right, well, pools are pretty handy. They can be a source of emergency water. In fact, they can be a reason that you attract emergency responder, unlike your neighbor. They can be a beacon to emergency responders. But it's not just fires. They are good in earthquakes. This is why, do you remember the drought years of 2014 and 2017? No water district told people they couldn't fill up their pool. They were telling people they couldn't water their landscapes, and there was a lot of restrictions, but nobody told you you couldn't fill up your pool. And the reason being is it's water still in the system. It's still a common good. If we had a severe earthquake like the San Andreas, it fractures the state water project. This now becomes a reliable source of water for your neighborhood. So it's not just fire that pools are good for. So, and then you want the most fire-resistant vegetation, and which we'll cover. Next slide. So whether you're rich or poor, homeowner or renter, this is important because 50% of the people in Eaton were renters. 70% of the people in Paradise were renters. We need to talk to everybody in fire country, not just homeowners. This is everybody's a fire animal. So whether you're rich or poor, homeowner or renter, ensure all openings are screened. Get your most disposable family member up on that ladder and checking those screens. You guys are in a maritime environment, which means that salt air is going to eat those metal screens. Every 4 years, get your cousin up on that ladder and start checking those screens. Clean your roof and gutters. If you want, you can email me, but we have an aging population, and I created a cheat sheet on how the elderly can clean their gutters without getting up on a ladder. There's all kinds of attachments, hoses, vacuums, blowers, but there's multiple ways to clean your gutters without getting up on a ladder. Manage and fill your gaps. If this was my home, I would take a power washer, wash off that paint, because that's where the firebrands would stick to. Take silicone, fill the gaps, and then just paint it with any paint. And just as long as when the firebrands hit, they drop. There's just nothing for it to attach to and ignite. And then make sure your address is visible. This is year-round protection. If you break your ankle, if there's a fire, anything, you really want to make sure your address is visible. Any questions right now? We'll save them for the last. Next one. And then the first 5 feet, you guys all know. Let me just explain. Did the fire captain explain why this is so important? Convection and compression. I'll just real quickly. If you have a 3-foot flame right here, and you take that same 3-foot flame and you put it up against a vertical surface, well, out here, that radiant heat is going in every direction. You put that flame up against a vertical surface, that radiant heat has nowhere to go. So it compresses up against the surface, and then a convective wind rushes up the side of this wall. And when that wind rushes up, it takes the flame with it. So what would be a 3-foot flame out here is a 6 or 7 or 8-foot flame up against your house. This is why everybody's going cuckoo pants about the zone 0. Because if you get a fire started up against your structure, it's a completely different fire. And we've known this since the 1980s, actually since the Bel Air fire of 1961. And you can see this. This is the Eaton fire. And had a neighbor not gotten a hose on this boxwood hedge, this house would have been lost. The fascia is already starting to blister and pop. The eaves were already on fire. And it was the boxwood hedges. Anytime you shear a hedge, they become this really big firebrand magnet because of that dense, twiggy, dead interior. So a firebrand landed on this, sent the flames up because it was compressed, and then shot it right towards the thing. You know this is going to be illegal, right? No more wood attached to your house. Everybody agrees on this in the state, whether you're insurance, landscape architects, that is now. So no woody, dry organic mulches, no storage, which means trash cans, unfortunately. Absolutely no flammable plants, no use of fabrics, avoid erecting shade devices, and do not attach anything to the structure that's flammable. Can anybody see the liability here? The vulnerability? Just call it out. What do you see? What's the danger here?
Stuff against the side of the wall.
Yeah, those are transient fuels. So this is an extra high fire hazard area in the Santa Ana foothills. You can see it's bordered on both sides by highly ignitable flash fuels. And the whole community was getting rated really good, super good. Non-flammable siding, non-flammable roofs, small eaves, double pane windows, incredible siding, great access around the structure. It had all the core characteristics, but I kept running into this one thing in this community. This is transient fuels. And this is the problem when we say no plants in zone 0, because humans are messy. And what they'll do is they'll take their Amazon box, throw it outside of their garage, run in and turn on whatever they just got, and that box will sit there for weeks or months. And it's these transient fuels, this basic housekeeping that creates such a vulnerability. And the thing is that a fire marshal could come in and tell this person, oh yeah, you've got a hazard, and they go, oh, I'll just clean that up. And then next year, a new hazard comes. We really need to be mindful of these transient fuels, especially with renters, to be honest with you. And then this will be illegal, that wooden gate attached to the house. Now this will have to be replaced. But these are endemic, no matter where you go. It's these transient fuels that show up. We can throw regulations all you want, but until we get this buy-in with the homeowners or the renters to make sure that that area is permanently clean, we're never going to see this herd immunity that we really need in our communities. Next slide. We'll push on for the last. Okay, here we go. And then defensible space. Just want to point out, with a fire-hardened structure and 30 feet of defensible space, that's it. You have more than a 90% chance of survival. You're there. Let's just focus. Everybody just focus on a fire-hardened structure, 30 feet, and you will see structural loss rapidly decline. Now, fences, CAL FIRE has gotten so good at tracking how fires move through urban areas, and they found out that fences are the 405 of fires. They are. Your property goes, and that wall of fire will just hop on the fence and go to your neighbor. It's the one feature that links everybody on your block together, is that commonality, is that fence. They are huge vulnerabilities. And again, we don't like our neighbors, so we typically plan on both sides. The fences in Altadena were so old and so wooden that it was impossible, nearly impossible, to see where property started and stopped in Altadena. There were just no fences, which was kind of surreal when you get there. I want to point out, this is the vinyl fence. This is PVC. It's considered highly fire resistant, and it's self-extinguished. So these are the, nobody has Italian cypress, right? No Italian cypress. So the Italian cypress ignited, was fully inflamed, and you can see that as the heat diminished, this self-extinguished. The problem with this fence, though, is when it melts. We'll see a lot of these in fire country because it's one of the least expensive options. So up in the Sierra foothills, you see a lot of this because it's so inexpensive. But the problem is, if it does melt, it leaves that toxic waste. So not only are the emergency responders breathing chlorine, which is a carcinogen, but then you've left this toxic soil in its wake. Naturally, metal, concrete would be far better as an alternative. Next slide. Anything that restricts. This is just a low-cost, low combustible fence. Up in Northern California, this is redwood with a 1-hour fire-resistant rating with concrete mesh, and then the Liegerstum, the Texas privet. So that will be really good for about the first 12 years, and then, as you know, all fences need replacing. And then these are all pictures I took on the peninsula. I really did see a lot of tree houses here. I don't know what it is with you guys, but a lot of overhangs. And these are so vulnerable. The higher up you go, the stronger the winds are, which means the heavier and the hotter those firebrands are going to be burning. So anything like this creates an incredible liability as that hot air and those firebrands go and attack the underside of this overhang. Once this ignites, the house easily ignites. This isn't really attached to a structure, but if it were to ignite, it would send firebrands all into the community, endanger everything downwind of it. So basic maintenance, this really needs care, attention, sanding, painting, and then the underside of it really should be painted with a non-flammable paint. Clean and preserve wood, remove flammable items like dead bushes around stuff like this. And you just want to make sure that there's no dead material, because you can bet dead leaves are accumulating on top of that tree house. So really, it's so much of fire protection is just basic housekeeping, getting off of our blue screens, getting into the garden, and getting dirty is really so much of fire protection. So whether you're rich or poor, homeowner or renter, remove all the flammable items up against your house. Really, I cannot stress this enough. Just 10 feet of defensible space will move the needle significantly, really help. Remove the dead, dying, and diseased vegetation. This is what allows a firebrand to turn into something bigger and greater. This is the link to your house. And then maintain landscape features such as fences and houses, outbuildings. I want to point out that this house, this is in Altadena. There's no houses surrounding this one that persist. This is the only one for about 1/8 of a mile. And this has survived 2 fires. I can't pronounce the name, in 1993 and then the 2025 Eaton fire. And this is care that's generational and profound. This house, which is I think 97 years old, has lived through all the changes in Altadena, and this is the level of care that we really need in fire country, where it can be generational, that whatever's embedded into that house, care is part of it. You move in knowing you are going to care for that house. And this is really what's needed in fire country, that level of concern, that level of seeing the vulnerability, doing something about. And this house was so well maintained that the deodar cedar lived, the house lived, all the vegetation lived, and there's nothing standing around this house. Okay, we'll do this. And then plants. Everybody loves plants. So after the Bel Air fire of 1961, the LA Arboretum did all kinds of studies on what makes a fire, or what makes a plant more flammable or not. And this is what they found out through the studies of the early 1970s and then afterwards, is that broadleaf plants are less flammable than conifers. Makes sense. Moist and easily bent leaves. So this camellia, if I take the leaf and I twist it or bend it, it doesn't snap or tear, which means it's less flammable as a consequence. If I take the leaf and I twist it and it snaps, it means it's more ignitable. Thick leaves are less ignitable than thin leaves. Low amounts of litter, whether that's a redwood or eucalyptus, anything that's putting a lot of debris on the ground. Sap that looks more like water. If you cut an oak tree, it will weep water. If I cut a pine, it will weep pitch. That pitch is way more flammable. Plants without a fragrance. This is a Mediterranean adaptation to water stress. So a lot of Mediterranean plants have fragrant leaves. Think of all our salvias. Well, fragrance is an oil, more combustible and ignitable. Plants with silver or gray leaves. This is another Mediterranean adaptation to too much solar radiation. So what the plant does is they take minerals from the soil, bring it into their leaves, and reflect that energy back into the atmosphere. It's a way to conserve water. So Dudleya, lamb's ear, artemisia, there's so many plants with gray leaves, really not flammable. And then plants without hair. You know, the California sycamore has that hairy underside of their leaf. Some people will feel it in the back of their throat. Well, it just makes it more ignitable. The tree itself is not a fire risk. The leaves, on the other hand, are highly ignitable. And there's all kinds of examples. So fire retardant, according to Kenneth Montgomery during his studies, when he put these plants in his burn chamber, they just sizzled and wilt. They really didn't produce a big flame. So lily of the Nile, redbud, crepe myrtle, fescue flax, gazania, grape, liquid amber, philodendron, photinia, and succulents, many of these plants are all around here, were fire retardant. Fire resistant uses far less water, and these are really the tougher Mediterraneans. A lot of these are natives. So the artemisia, silver king, the California lilac, the rock rose, which was Kenneth Montgomery's all-time most fire-resistant plant. All your oaks, not just the evergreens, cotoneaster, all your russuses, all your mallows, all your verbenas, toyon, yarrow, and then yucca, which is right there. All considered fire-resistant. Here's the problem, though. Plant lists are stupid. They are. Every plant I've ever recommended, I just saw a pile of ash. In fact, this picture right here, this is the bonfire of 2020. So this is sycamore, oak, and lemonade berry, all native. And they didn't help at all. And the reason they didn't help is because the occupant didn't help them. True resistance is a relationship between you and the landscape. You want to create a landscape that is the best version of those plants. And in return, those plants will reciprocate and protect you because you've spent your career protecting them. Next slide. Let's see if I have this picture. Oh, they took out the picture. You guys know Christmas Tree Lane in Altadena? Inspiring story. Deodoar's cedars have all the wrong characteristics. They are considered a flammable tree. But not one of the 135 Deodoar cedars along Christmas Tree Lane, which is almost a mile long, ignited. And because of that, not one of the homes were lost. It's a sea of survival in an ocean of mayhem. The impact of Christmas Tree Lane was so profound that it had a protective impact downwind of it. And the only reason those trees persisted, all 135, is because of the care and consideration they were given. People gave up their Saturdays to care for their plants. And it showed. Have you ever been to Christmas Tree Lane? Every year they light up the whole street, and thousands of people drive through that street every Christmas. If you move onto the street, it is known you are going to give one Saturday a month to maintain your trees in your community. It wasn't fire protection that saved them, it was love. Love of where they live, love of their neighbors, love of place, love of tree. Saved that entire block. You are in partnership. The plants are not the enemy. They need a companion to pull the greatest, best version of themselves. And that's our role, is to nurture a landscape so it's the best version of itself. And that landscape will stick up for you. I don't know if I sold that, but I've seen it. I've seen it in camp. I've seen it in Paradise. I've seen it in Santa Rosa. People with a strong gardening ethic have fire retardant landscapes. Does that to the fire. I've seen it. So whether you're rich or poor, homeowner or renter, remove the dead, dying, and diseased vegetation. Please clean up. This is what fire will devour more than anything. This is the kindling that creates. Replace vegetation before it becomes an economic liability or a fire risk. Gardeners are so remiss to remove stuff because we hold stuff in our hearts so deeply. But sometimes we have to be fire in our own garden. We have to be that agent of renewal, regeneration. That is really a compassionate gardener. And then do not let your plants dry out. I want to remind you that fire, Altadena, that was January 7th. And that fire ravished water-stressed landscapes. We didn't get any moisture. Remember, we had late Thanksgiving, and then it just shut down. Nothing in December. But we've been trained not to water. And so we didn't, and we let our plants go into a state of distress because almost all plants evolve to receive water in winter. That's when they open up. This is when they receive the bounty from our mother, and they didn't. And nobody thought or considered enough to turn on the irrigation. And so they hit a bone-dry landscape, bone-dry front yards, and just tore through these neighborhoods. Please be sensitive to the needs of your plant. If you see water stress, we're going to have to respond just as if we saw water stress in our child or our grandchild. We would respond with care. We need that kind of attention in fire control. So, okay. I think this is it. So these are just all kinds of state-approved fire vents, which we have all the manufacturers out here, nursery centers with as much information as landscape contractors, and then fire retardant paints. I do have a lot of cheat sheets at home, like what are the most flammable plastics? I can send you that. How to clean the gutters without getting up on ladders. If anybody has questions, just email me. I've been doing this since the 1990s, and I have all kinds of resources.